Welcome, everybody, to the Raad Life, the only talk radio show that takes you along with host and age explorer Rod Gantos on his continuing journey of discovery into life's challenges, opportunities, options, and all the latest and greatest things that come with getting older. The Rad Life is brought to you this week by Your Home for a Lifetime, a company dedicated to empowering you to stay safely, independently, and comfortably in your own home. And now here is your host, Rad Gantos.
You know, I was just listening to that intro. We've been doing this show for 3 years. I think I have not. I stopped listening to this intro. Do you believe it? 3 years.
3 years.
3 years.
You're more than a toddler now.
I don't know. I think I want to go back in the womb after 3 years. I just want to go hide. But no, I mean, we've been doing it for 3 years. I was just listening to the show, very apropos to what we're talking about. And there was this thing about taking you on a journey of exploration, right? And you know, there is such a thing sometimes that ignorance is bliss. I don't know what I don't know.
Yeah.
But then I know what I didn't know back one day later, and I'm like, now, you know, I don't want that awareness. There are times we are in a very interesting time, both I think as a county, both as where I live down in South County, as a country. There's just and I use the word interesting not because I'm trying to sugarcoat it but it really is. If you take a helicopter approach and just look at it, it is a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of sort of social consciousness stuff. There's a lot of sort of, you know, we're trying to weed through some stuff that we have inherited as policy that really doesn't make any sense. We're trying to go back to some things that we kind of abandoned along the way. There's all this stuff going on, and there's multiple players. You know, there's the entrenched people that are involved, that have been involved forever, that are kind of career politicians or career nonprofits or whatever. And there's this young blood coming in, like the case with the school shooting down in Florida, you know. And it's like all of this flux that's going on, and I don't know. I'm kind of excited at the same time that I'm kind of like overwhelmed.
But one thing remains constant. Someone's making a lot of money.
You know what?
And it tends to be the same folks.
You know what also remains constant?
What?
That Dr. Jose Moreno is on the show one more time.
That's right.
I think, what is it, like third time or fourth time you've been on the show?
It's my third time.
My third time.
3 years, 3 times.
3 times, 3 years. Okay, so we got to put it on the calendar. Every year, Dr. Moreno has to be on the show. So otherwise, that's like going to be our like weather balloon. Like, you know, if you're on the show, then we're good. But you know, first time you were on the show, I think you were running for city council.
Right.
Like the second time you came in, you were already earlier. I think it was late last year, and we talked about stuff that's going on in the county and Anaheim and so forth. But the first time you were on the show, you were running for city council.
Yeah.
As the first candidate for the newly apportioned districts in Anaheim.
And this is why this is why I keep Paul around, because he fills in all that information that is necessary. Actually, let's go back, and for those who don't know, the reason you ran for city council is because the city of Anaheim, due to a threat of lawsuit or whatever, was actually found to be non-representative of certain portion of the population, and therefore subject to districting, which was not the case up till that point, right?
Right.
And that was a long process too.
Right.
Was it like a year or almost? It was
Well,
longer.
it was 3 decades, frankly, that communities had been pushing
For districting.
For district-based elections.
I didn't realize it was that long.
There was an actual vote in the city of Anaheim by the council after community residents, Los Amigos of Orange County, David, just kept pushing the city council to consider moving to bi-district elections.
Right.
At the time, about a third of the population was Latino.
Right.
And I think it was in 1992, it went to a vote. Tom Daley was mayor, who is now our assemblyman, Democrat.
Sure.
And it was a vote to allow the people to vote on whether we should move to bi-district elections, right? So because 92. So because we're a charter city, any changes to the charter have to go to a vote of the people.
Right.
So in 1992, the community was able to get council members to go ahead and put it on the agenda and to have a full discussion, and they then had to vote on whether to put it on the ballot for the electorate to decide should we change our charter to move to by district elections.
Okay.
That was 1992. Tom Daley was a tie-breaking vote, and he voted against it. Democrat.
And
what was the rationale?
Rationale was what?
Rationale was Anaheim's working fine by all of its people. There's no need to break itself up into different divided political barriers.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
The cities seems to be going well. Everybody's cool. Everything's great. Was the arguments. And we know both through the lens of history, but also at the time why people were pushing so hard, is that the people were losing control of the politics of Anaheim.
Again, I want to remind everybody who's listening, you're talking about 1992.
1992. So the community kept pushing, but there really wasn't political will at that point because the interests that controlled were really starting to tighten their grip on the control of Anaheim's politics, squeezed even harder, so no politician would come near it.
So when was the next time that it
So
actually
the next
came
step that it really came up was we began to make the push in 2010, asking the council to begin to agendize it, to look at it. They wouldn't. They finally...
That's almost 2 decades later.
Right. So then we were able to get the support of labor, of community organizations, and the ACLU and other lawyers who were willing to take on the case, and then sent a demand letter to the council saying, look, under the California Voting Rights Act, which passed in 2001, you should really look at whether you have a racially polarized electorate. It appears you do. And the city council then chose to take it on as a lawsuit and fight against districts for 2 years. Spent almost $3 million and ultimately settled. And as a charter city, had to go to the voters, and 70% of the voters said, yes, we want to go to by-district elections, and here I am.
And then the process of what basically was the map to follow
Right.
for what the districts are, and there was multiple options, and again, there was an attempt. I mean, I wouldn't say it was underhanded, but there was definitely an attempt to basically shape the districts in a format that worked for some people, but in a different way than others, and it ended up settling on what was referred to as the People's Map, I think, right?
Well, I would say it was underhanded.
You can say that.
You're right.
I was, yeah.
I think you're more the politician
It's a
today than me.
It's a soft love. No, I'm just getting started. I'm just
So,
getting started.
No, it was underhanded. The settlement, which we thought was a fair thing to do, is we didn't want the shaping of the maps in the hands of the elected officials themselves. We know that they tend to develop maps that only benefit their own incumbencies. So,
Which it's 2018. It's an election year. We're seeing examples of that all over the country.
right.
Yeah.
So the settlement required that if approved by the voters, there were 2 initiatives. One, to go to by-district elections. The second initiative was to expand council from 4 members to 6. I mean, we're a large city.
Mm-hmm.
So that would put the city council districts at about 55,000 people or so, give or
What's
take.
the population of Anaheim?
360,000. It's the largest city in the county.
You had only 4 city council members?
Right, and the mayor. Right,
Wow.
right. So we said...
And the
yeah,
mayor is the only one that represents, under the current system, the at-large, the city at
And
large.
that's,
They're
and
elected.
that's a
Right.
separate election, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
It's its own election.
Yeah.
So both measures passed, and the settlement required that then a commission of retired judges would then be the group to look at different maps. There would be a full public process for the public to submit maps to for the commission of judges to consider. They would then recommend a map or set of maps to the city council for final approval.
Okay.
And that's where the community rallied around multiple interests, chose a map, and everything.
How long of that?
So
did
that was a
take?
year.
Okay.
That was a year process. So here we are. So there was underhanded tricks at the last moment. The council voted 5-0 to approve the map that the judges all said only one map they thought was the best map. And the council approved it in the first read, 5-0. And then something happened in the 2 weeks between that all of a sudden they switched up and they said, oh, we feel this map may be illegal. And some of our own community members went and did some underhanded things, in my opinion. And some of the electeds exploited that. And so it just threw everything into
And let's step back for
frenzy.
step back for a second and explain. And this is not uncommon because there's other cities where there is no districts that this actually is the case. Is in Anaheim, if I am correct, a lot of the members of the city council actually came from the same part of Anaheim.
For years,
For years and years.
For
right?
years, consistently, the Hills dominated. the majority of the council. By dominated means they are the area of Anaheim that tends to vote at the most highest proportion.
Most engaged. There's money for campaigns.
Yeah, and right.
Financial
and
support.
That's right, and then within the flatlands of Anaheim, it would be the real core area of the city of the flatlands. And the west side, this was probably one of the most compelling arguments that really brought a lot of coalitions together, because the lawsuit was based on a civil rights lawsuit of Latino civil rights. But really the west side came on really strong because we pointed out that the west side did not have a council member from that area for over 22 years.
That's crazy.
And that's 160,000 people at least.
And what's the ethnic makeup of that area?
It's largely Latino. Anywhere you go in Anaheim, it's largely Latino. It's 55% of the city is Latino.
Can I tell you something?
Yeah.
I actually, until this whole situation with the districting, and I've been in Southern California since '85. I had, and in Orange County probably since '87. I actually did not connect in my own mind that Anaheim Hills and Anaheim were the same city.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
I actually did not realize that. I thought Anaheim Hills was a separate city, like Chino Hills, and then Anaheim was a separate city, because even in proximity, I mean, I did a project in Anaheim Hills about a year or two years ago, and it even like really dawned on me when I actually went to Anaheim to apply for a business license because of this project that I'm doing in Anaheim Hills. Yeah. I mean, it was like a 45-minute ride almost from one location to the other. I never, in my mind, until that district map, even put the two things together. So to have a territory that big, to have representatives that are all from a certain area for that long,
right.
I mean, just common sense would say that you have a problem with representation, at least.
And I think there are folks who try to really forge a real tension between voters and residents in the hills. My thoughts have always been voters vote their interest. And so I don't begrudge the voters in the hills for voting however they do. But at the end, they are determining what happens to a huge part of the city that they don't themselves often.
Well, democracy through representation is the core foundation, right? I mean, right. I mean, so to have to find fault with somebody, basically voting their interest,
right,
in their neighborhood, in their immediate surroundings, is not a problem in my mind, because that is exactly what the principle is. Now, whether that interest is overwhelmingly represented when you have other people that are not that are underrepresented, and that the system basically doesn't give them that voice, that's when we start having a problem.
Right.
So what do you say to the people on the other side, people from the hills? We've had them in here, the traditional Republican cohorts, who say when you go to districting, they acknowledge the problem. One group of people from one small area tend to dominate the politics over a long period of time. Whether it's Capo Unified School District or Anaheim Hills, there are wealthy enclaves where people are engaged and have the money and the interests, and they tend to dominate local politics. That's just the way it's been. So obviously you want to go to districting. Their argument is not going to make it more contentious, because you've got people that only look at one small subset and fight for those interests rather than the overall interests of the city as a whole.
So what you're saying is, when you basically subdivide it into districts, you have a disconnect in what is in the best interest of the city as a whole, because everybody's looking out for their own thing.
Exactly. Now you've taken that problem of Anaheim Hills looking out for itself, and you've multiplied, because you got 5 or 6 people now all fighting to look for some subsector.
I have my own feelings about this, but I'm interested to see what you have to say, Dr. Moreno. What do you think about that?
Well, we have congressional districts, we have senatorial districts at the state level.
Right.
It's I think.
And that was the argument way back when between the two.
No, it's still an argument today.
It was, but remember, I just mentioned the history that it was a Democratic mayor, Tom Daley, who was a swing vote and voted against going to districts. It wasn't a Republican.
Right.
And in fact, it was a Republican mayor, Tom Tate, who championed districts. And really going back to the real ethic of what is presumed to be the authentic part of the Republican Party, which is the best form of government is the government closest to its people.
Hear that all the time out here,
so Republicans who I think use arguments that you just suggested, Paul, basically to me are not being true to their own creed.
But Jose,
and Democrats the same.
Exactly. Thank you. That's exactly what I was going to say. The argument that Paul presented is not really partisan. The argument is used by by each side for their own interest.
Right.
And it happens all the time. And to your point, if we're okay with congressional districts and representation, if we're okay with representation over a larger area, I will say that also you will look at congressional districts, and in some cases the elected official is actually doing a great job being representative of the whole area.
Yeah.
And in some cases, it's not.
And I don't hear Republicans demanding we change the Electoral College.
No. And
that's, I mean, talking about disproportional influence that has.
let's take a minute about this, because I think you guys are both Democrats. I'm independent. I have been for many, many years. And I think it's important, again, to mention this because we are an Orange County show, at least in this county. But I think it is actually a reflection of the nation. In this county, the conversation about Republican and Democrat is almost detrimental to us moving forward because it isn't really representative of the political climate in this county. We have a 30-30-30 split almost between independent, non-party affiliated, Democratic and Republican. And we've had fluxes in the Democratic Party for their own internal issues, and we've had Republicans shedding, membership for their own issues as well. The only party, I keep saying this, the only party I was ever registered to was the Republican Party. Whatever this party is that's supposedly the GOP does not even stand close to what it represented to me when I was a Republican. And I think the Democrats, with all respect to friends of mine that are very engaged and involved and give a lot of their time and energy to this, the Democratic Party is in its own crisis mode right now, trying to identify what it stands for.
Couldn't even support Senator Feinstein for another run at whether you think it's good or bad. That was a shock to see that an incumbent didn't get support.
There's a paradigm shift happening in the party, and I think 2018 is going to be an interesting year. Is it going to be the year that finally shows us that when push comes to shove, people are going to be voting on issues and voting on actual candidates
versus party tribes, right?
Party tribalism, and I don't know what the answer is. What do you think?
Well,
have we grown up to that point yet, or no?
When we started the conversation, you mentioned that I ran because of districts.
Yeah,
I actually ran while we were still at large. The cycle before we moved to at large.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, I ran in part because I wanted to use the platform of an election to encourage people to vote for the referendum for district elections. I knew that it was a real long shot to win because at large system you need super big money and it's a racially polarized electorate. And sure enough, the hit pieces we received at that time from Disney-sponsored PACs, Orange County Business Council PACs, Orange County Tax PACs, Police Association PACs were really borderline. They were very racialized. They were very classed. That I'm going to promote racial balkanization. That I'm going to promote that I'm pro-gang, anti-police. That I'm
as if anybody would be pro-gang. Who's pro-gang? Right. On left, right, or whatever.
So you can't counter that, right, in an at-large election if you don't have the money.
Well, it's actually a waste of your energy too, because
it is.
Now you're engaging in their narrative.
It is. So I ran that year. I'm of course wanting to win, so we tried really hard, but it's just next to impossible in an at-large. But in a district system, the reason I ran, I didn't participate in moving to district elections so that I can be on council. I ran because the option for me in my district was a sitting Democrat who did play around with the maps, who did play around with our district elections movement that we were pushing. He voted time and time again to give away $700 million of future TOT money. $700 million in corporate tax giveaways.
What's
TOT for those?
So the transient occupancy tax, the bed tax.
Okay.
So he championed economic trickle-down policies as a Democrat, knowing that those things don't work. We know that. Yet he voted and championed a 45-year local tax exemption of an entertainment tax if one was ever imposed. It didn't even exist, but Disney insisted that they wanted a 45-year protection if the voters ever decided to impose a tax. He championed that, so 45-year local tax exemption for Disney, treating them almost like a church. And again, $700 million in corporate subsidies of a tax giveaway to the Disney Corporation for a 4-star hotel, the Wincom Group for 2 4-star hotels, and the Garden Walk Hotel, which is going to be a JW Marriott. $700 million of future tax money, of which the voters voted to have, right? So the voters voted for a bed tax, and they just simply gave it away without even asking the voters.
So the voters.
So for
voted
me,
for
I was
a bed
compelled by
tax.
that. I was compelled to run for that reason. Is in the interest of our
voters
neighborhoods.
voted for a bed tax, and this is while Anaheim was at large.
Right.
And so there was consensus throughout the community of Anaheim to basically vote for a bed tax.
Right.
And then a move was made to exempt certain parties from that tax.
Or to give them
But
to
basically,
give them a big 2/3, 70% of that tax right back to the corporate. And they framed it, and this particular incumbent, who's a Democrat incumbent, framed it as a rebate, and so did that
so was
the
it,
industry.
So was it? Am I understanding this correctly? The tax would still apply,
Right.
but then 70% of the tax collected by the city would then be put back in some sort of incentive program.
So they framed So they framed it as a rebate, as a tax rebate to the Disney Corporation, right, to build a 4-star hotel. It would amount over 20 years to $280 million of our bed tax going back to Disney.
I'm going to give Anaheim $100, and they're going to give me back 70.
Right. So, but the tax, it's not a rebate because the tax is paid by the tourist.
Mhm.
So if it's truly a rebate, when you gave the hotel $100 for the room, $15 of it presumably, or 115 because 15% tax, you should get that $15 back if it's truly a rebate. You, the tourist, who paid for the room. It's not. The hotel is the tax collector for the city, right? They then, on those receipts, pay that money to the city. They're just the collector. So the incentive policies, these corporate subsidies, are that they don't get rebated back to the tourist who paid the actual money. That money gets given to the hotel developer, to the corporation, and it's never their money. They were just the collector.
So they collected the money from their visitors, and then they basically gave it to the city.
And the city writes a check right back.
And then the city would write a check for 70% back.
Right.
Basically.
So
Yeah,
that's why it's a giveaway.
So it's still So it's an additional revenue source basically for them that is
Correct.
being passed through the city.
Correct.
Okay.
Now, if the corporation said, we're going to pay all of our workers $25 an hour, we're going to make sure they have full health care benefits, and we're going to provide child care because you're subsidizing us like that, then that might be a conversation to have. But they don't.
So there's a bigger conversation here of fairness basically and equal.
And can I ask about another conversation?
Well, but before you do, Paul, so let me ask you this.
On Disney, yeah.
Is this situation with whether you want to call it a rebate or give
No, it's not whether. No, right. I'm going to be insistent on
okay,
that. It's not really a semantic question. It really is about a rebate goes back to the person who paid it.
So what are we calling it? We're not calling it a rebate.
It's a
An
giveaway.
incentive.
It's a giveaway.
No, it's a giveaway.
Okay, so this
I'm
giveaway.
giving you $280 million to build your hotel.
That's fine, and I'm okay with that. So it's not a rebate; it's a giveaway. Is this giveaway something that is common in communities? Is it common in downtown LA? Is it common in communities that are basically heavily hospitality?
Unfortunately, yes.
Okay.
However, in other,
I'm just trying to see if this
right,
is an
right.
industry standard.
Unfortunately, it is. I don't know if it's a standard per se, but it's a shakedown. Honestly, it's if you don't give us your public money, right?
We're going to go somewhere else.
We're going to go somewhere else. So it's a shakedown. So we see it with NFL stadiums, with baseball stadiums. I mean,
Well, you guys had a situation similar to that with the Angels,
and that's how they were threatening us, right?
Yeah.
So, but frankly, that was something more proposed from our negotiators, was proposed to the Angels. As it turns out, the Angels are just trying to figure out how do we do a good deal for us that works out. It was our negotiators from the city side under council directives who were saying,
So
lease them the land for $1.
Here's the question: When did that get reversed? When did the TOT thing get reversed or canceled?
So they called it an economic incentive policy.
Yeah.
Because they said we need to incentivize building 4-star hotels in the city. The industries were saying there really isn't a market, so it's a risky proposition for us to build 4-star hotels. But if the city's willing to invest with us in it, then you'll ultimately, after 20 years, get 100% TOT on a 4-star hotel, which is more TOT because the room costs more, so more tax. That's kind of the scenario they set forth. And it's pretty clear that the 4-star market is in demand. It's in demand.
I'm kind of rolling my eyes because I don't understand how a 4-star hotel is actually not something as we see. In fact, it is the model that would work
Right.
these days. The 3-star
Right.
doesn't, because the 3-star is trying to be a 4. The 5 is too expensive and has to have other amenities associated with it in order for it to genuinely be a 5-star.
Right.
So the 4-star, whether it to be business travel or guest stay or whatever, is the model of choice.
Right.
So that's a fascinating argument.
And even more so when you're in a county that presumably is still dominated at the local level by Republican. I mean, most city councils are majority Republican. At the time, the city council was 4 Republicans and 1 Democrat. Interestingly, the Republican mayor opposed all that basically on the philosophy and ideology that he holds fiscally, which is, hey, you're a business, you take risks. And, if it works out for you, great. If it doesn't, then, that's the risk that you take. And we'll figure out how to support your business through marketing and other things, which we do through Visit Anaheim. But to ask us to use public funds to build your business,
to reduce your risk,
reduce your risk is just not part of the quote-unquote American way.
So let's talk about that, because I want to move on to something else. But of those projects that supposedly were predicated on this basic giveaway, how many of those projects stalled?
Well, it was capped at 2,000 rooms. So
For
the policy
the giveaway.
wasn't any 4-star at any time.
Okay.
It had a set, which made it very suspect. It had a very set number. It said 2,000 rooms.
What made it suspect?
I think it's up to 2,000 rooms. It just seemed like within a matter of months that the policy was approved by the council, the Disney Corporation and Wincom came in right away with plans for a 4-star hotel. And so they applied right away. And
with a quantity of rooms off?
With exactly the quantity of rooms that the policy recommended as its cap. So it was capped. And then, of course, once that was done, it was fulfilled, and the policy is pretty much moved.
Which is interesting, because if I'm, ABC Hotel Company and I want to build a project in Anaheim, now I am unable to, because that particular giveaway incentive is basically being capped at 2,000 rooms.
And they were not allowed or given time to really figure out what kind of proposal they'd like to make. It was very much an inside lobbyist, corporate interests, relational thing. Not uncommon, but that's what was important to us in a district election discussion is, that needs to be sunshine, which is one of the things that we did last year. I
Perfect
put forth
transition.
to sunshine and lobbyist registry. It's who is influencing these decisions? When is this being discussed? And what was interesting is when the media and other citizens were asking, residents were asking under public information tax for, who was talking about these subsidies and when were they talking and who was council talking to? There's no records of any conversations between these corporate entities, or very limited, between these corporate entities and council members. So it's almost like council members did this in a vacuum, but it's impossible.
So for those who don't know, 2 questions. One, what is the Sunshine? What did you call it?
Right.
The
so
Sunshine Act?
it's a sunshine and lobbyist registry ordinance. That I put forward to the city.
What is it?
So one is to sunshine projects, so that the local community, if there are projects being proposed by the city or by a developer that will impact the local neighborhood or the character of it, it has to be sunshine sooner and noticed sooner, with signs up so that the public knows.
So for those, when you use the word sunshine, for those who are the layman language, is more visibility, more transparency, out in front, additional effort made to make sure that everybody's getting it.
Right.
Don't send it in a sort of an enclosed email focused on a certain group of people.
Right.
Okay.
Where previous councils we saw on the agenda on a Friday something's noticed, and then Tuesday the council takes a vote. So it's really important that the public is aware of these decisions when they're being made. The lobbyist registry also requires that anyone who makes at least $500 a month from an entity to advocate on their behalf for a project or set of projects has to register with the city as a lobbyist. In addition, there was a practice in the city where council members would have staff members who were also simultaneously employed by lobbying firms who had business in the city. So this ordinance also said you cannot be an employee.
Insider information.
Correct.
And their argument was that the city staff wasn't sufficient, so they went outside and hired outside public affairs agencies, and as you're pointing out, who also happen to work for corporate interests doing business in the city.
Who represent the very interests that are also lobbying you for projects, correct. So it is insider information. And then also it includes not just the council members, but from the director level on management, that if you leave the city, also as a council member, that you cannot come back and lobby for a project for 2 years if it's a project that you were
Right,
involved
because
in.
a lot of people leverage their accessibility
Right.
and connections
Right.
basically once they transition. Yeah, that's interesting. So the second question I had on that is how many cities, I'm just curious, how many cities in Orange County, I won't even go further than that, actually have that in place? Do you know?
0.
Well, Santa Ana, and I actually looked at Santa Ana as a model because they did, Accord put out a study of Santa Ana and Anaheim about 8 to 10 years ago that looked at this question of planning commissioners. Who are the planning commissioners? And they tended to be commissioners who had contributed to the campaigns of council members, which in and of itself, you know, that's not a
But
huge
they're
issue for me.
assigned and not elected.
It's not a huge issue for me. But when they looked at the ties to industries, that's where it became really problematic. And so, so they passed the Sunshine Ordinance. I think ours goes a little further, but as far as I know, only Santa Ana.
So out of the 34 cities, there's only 2 that we know of that do this.
As far as I know, I could be wrong.
That's
but as
fascinating.
far as
I know we're trying to push for it in San Clemente because I think it's something. I mean, if you're really going to stand up and say you are for democracy and representative democracy, and you're for equality, and if not even.
And you want to drain the swamp
Well,
and all
forget
this
about
stuff
it's
that
not
they
even,
talk
it's
about.
not even that. It's if you have control by a few people for a particular interest in in something, it makes it forget about the person on the street, forget about the citizen side of it. There's other people that are also involved in those industries that are basically being shut out because of those limitations. So there's unfairness on every level. I think the old adage, if you have nothing to hide, then you have no issue basically having that on the books, right? So and the topic of lobbying, the topic of influence peddling in the county, which again I'm sure it is not limited to the county. Once you start following the money, you see exactly the insidious nepotism that is involved in that, and it is not something that is just here and gone. It's something that has been institutionalized over decades in certain pockets. And again, the answer is money. What was the question? And follow the money because it is immediately clear. Right? I mean, you and I were talking off the air, and it was mind-blowing, and at the same time, sadly not surprising, that certain key players were involved on a lot of different things that have saddled cities and county with expenditures and costs where lobbyists and consultants basically made the money and then left stuff in their wake.
Right. So our big example...
And it continues today.
One of the prime examples in Anaheim is the Arctic transportation.
Which, for people who don't know, what is
Anaheim Regional Transportation Intermodal,
which was heralded as the Union Station of Orange County, basically. Right.
So industries around the county, the Orange County Business Council, the Disney Corporation, lobbyists, developers just lobbied hard for that to be built. Anaheim, the mayor of the time, Kurt Pringle, who for 8 years after became probably the most influential lobbyist in the city of Anaheim because all things went through him. And so we're now saddled with a close to $3 million operating deficit on that train station.
What was his
year.
role before being
He was the mayor.
He was the mayor of Anaheim.
He was the mayor of Anaheim. And so he, what a lot of people don't know about Arctic is it's a $3 million operating deficit by itself, and all these industries lobbied for it. And so now we're straddled with our general fund having to pay for that. And when we've asked them, hey, can you help? They helped for a couple years, but now they don't want to. They're saying it's not their role. But you lobbied for it, right? In addition...
And who would that be? Like, who lobbied for it that you would...
Orange County Business Council, the Disney Corporation, the SOAR, the Support Our Anaheim Resorts, which is the community PAC created by Disney to lobby for resort interests.
And they did, for a while, support some money out of their funds or budgets to help operate this facility in the hope that someday it'll grow and be self-sustaining.
For the first 2 years they did. But all the projections of ridership, of revenues, they were just this glossy picture. And it just was, and folks looked at the data and said, that doesn't look right. It just doesn't look right. And sure enough, it wasn't right.
And the parallels of what you're saying relevant to Arctic? are
So
parallels that are actually on the toll road situation.
Exactly.
Same group of people,
Exactly.
same entities. You start looking at those entities closer, and you see overlap of people.
So I think my concern is when you look at, and it was supposed to be an answer to regional issues, right? Just like the toll
Just
roads.
like the toll road.
So if we're going to look at regional issues, we're looking at it now with homelessness or on regional issues. I think it's really important that elected officials and community watchdog groups really look at, like I said, who stands to financially benefit in that regional approach. And I just think there's so many lobbyists that are involved.
By
in
the way,
this.
it's not our first rodeo on the homeless issue either.
Right.
And it's the same people that were involved in that last time around.
That's right. And what I'm finding, Rod, and I'm finding this at TCA, is that a lot of these lobbyists that are lobbying for projects also run public relations firms that run the campaigns of the very elected officials that they are now lobbying.
And now are holding contracts with those agencies.
Right. So we see this, for example, in Anaheim. One of our council members, Chris Murray, she contracts a firm called Communications Lab to do her staffing, right? $75,000 contract per year, $71,000 contract per year. They do all of her public relations work as staffing for the city. So they're technically city employees in that regard, contracted by the city. They also work for Poseidon.
The project
and they put together materials basically advocating for
Beach.
Poseidon, Huntington Beach, for desalinization. However one feels about the issue, Communications Lab is essentially advocating and lobbying for that group. And Anaheim has a seat on the water board that will ultimately make a decision about Poseidon.
Yep.
Communications Lab also has had as a client, I don't know if they're the current, but they've listed on their website, TCA.
Transportation Corridor Authority.
I sit on TCA as a representative of Anaheim. We have a seat at the table. So now someone who's presumably a firm staffing one of our council members is also staffing TCA and lobbying to get that toll road done, right? And so I'm
getting
as
paid
as
a contract as a consultant,
right?
to TCA.
And then that same Communications Lab is also contracted by Councilwoman Murray to also run her campaigns. And so you look at her electoral website, right, that she runs when she runs for elections. It says created by, designed by Communications Lab. So you look at that, you say, whoa, how are you contracted as the firm to staff her as a councilwoman, and also you are contracted to run her campaign?
At the very least, there's some conflict of interest there.
It doesn't pass.
And I'm trying to be nice.
It doesn't pass the smell test, as Republicans like to say. So
why doesn't she just hire staff paid by the city? I'm assuming she gets funds to set up an office.
By the way, this is not an isolated case.
I only know because I know that one intimately, but
there's other firms that are overlapping like that.
I think it's important for us to look at the regional bodies, right? That the regional bodies, they hire lobbyists. We hire public relations firms as well, just like cities do. So I'm really curious to look at what are the connections between, are we hiring lobbyists and public relations firms that are also being hired by members of the directors of the board of directors of the water board or TCA or of the sanitation district.
And if an entity is running somebody's campaign,
exactly,
and then
their staff,
and then that person is and their staff, and then that person is sitting on a board to where they're basically issuing contracts to consultants for work that needs to be done, and that particular entity gets that contract. I mean, it doesn't pass the smell test is the least way of describing that.
I'm going to run Rod's campaign. I'm going to be his public staff to advise him on positions.
Right.
And at the same time, I'm going to
And then after I get elected, I'm basically going to send all my media needs basically in a contract to you and OC Talk Radio.
And OC Talk Radio is also then representing...
And then you'll run for my re-election campaign as well.
But I'm also representing a big corporate entity that's trying to get a contract from the city.
Correct. Or subsidies. Or
No. Worse than that.
Giveaways.
You're the one getting the contract from the city.
Well, we'll have to call Brian. I know Brian at Communications Lab. He used to host a show here for when we did the Association of California Cities.
Again, I mean, I want to be clear, right? This is not picking on a particular person, okay? If the system as it is today is rigged to allow this to happen, then it's the norm of doing business. The question is whether we as voters, we as people that are citizens of Orange County, want to accept that as being the norm anymore.
Right.
And if it's not, then what do we do about it?
And if you talk about it, that's why at-large elections was so difficult, and it's still difficult, is if you talk about that, if you really confront that, you're done. And that's why nobody would touch these issues for 2 decades, 3 decades, 4 decades.
Yeah,
in
because
Anaheim.
there's a spotlight now basically on the topic.
And all the money would go to take you out,
Yeah.
right? So now under a district environment, it just, I think it promotes the idea of people being more transparent and not feeling a need to get tied to interest, but saying, I'm going to be as independent as I can. And of course, I'll take resources from people who want to support things that I'm interested in. But there's no quid pro quo.
You know what I find fascinating, Jose? What I find fascinating is that your whole approach to basically putting in an ordinance in Anaheim actually was inspired by an ordinance in Santa Ana.
Right.
Okay? And that we in Orange County are now looking at Anaheim and Santa Ana at possibly what it can do to help us with changing the policies to where we have better representation. I mean, that is fascinating in itself.
Yeah.
I mean, understandably, Anaheim is one of the largest city
The largest
in
city,
Orange
correct,
County. Santa
correct.
Ana is right up there as well,
Right there.
right? So
It's the county seat.
right. So these entities that have been sort of regarded as, it's North County, Santa Ana, sort of the armpit of Orange County kind of
Right.
thing. Okay, they're the ones where this catalyst change is happening. And it's providing an example for the Deep South where I am and other places to basically look at what's happening. And I think it is improving conditions, at least in terms of equal representation, which supposedly is the basis of our
Right.
democracy.
And wasn't Santa Ana, but again, I'm sorry.
And I'm sure you're not doing yourself any favors being on this show. We're talking about this stuff with the fact that you're running for re-election in 2018. But I mean, I know that you have one way of being, and this is the way of being.
Well, the favor, it's a great favor to be here sitting in front of Rod and Paul. It is, just because you allow, I think, a platform for these conversations to be had. The ones that you're not doing a favor for are folks who are tied to those interests that may depend on them to get elected.
And you know
Yeah.
what, to be fair across the board as
Yeah.
well, is they are welcome to be here too.
Right.
Because one thing we don't do is we do provide that platform, because I think even difficult conversations, this is the basic premise in my life, is even when it is a difficult conversation, even when it's a difficult situation, we as a group, as a community, as an entity at large, benefit by going through the process of having that
let's
difficult
talk about it
conversation
at least, right.
versus burying our heads in the
Right.
beach sand and avoiding it.
That's why I'd love to hear.
So anybody can come over. I mean, I had Ashley Etkin on here. I've had
Oh,
Josh
right,
Newman. I reached out. I had Matthew Harper here. Greg Grath's been here a couple of times. There are other people that we're reaching for across the political aisle to be here with it being an election year, because everything that happens, and people will say, well, this show is about seniors and aging. No, it's about life's journey, and we all are living in a communal situation called Orange County, and policies that are put in place really impact us in every shape or form. So when somebody is going to be elected into a position that's going to have the power to basically participate in putting in a policy or adjusting a policy, it affects everybody from senior to child in school.
Right.
And if giving them the opportunity to basically say that here before they get elected or after,
Right.
it is our pleasure to provide this platform.
I'm willing to go along with this conversation because I think it's an important one, rather than cut it off at the normal hour, because we don't have a bi-weekly. We have another show after this. We don't today, so I'm willing to go along. But let's take a commercial break and just regroup for a second, and then come back. And I got a couple.
Is the
interesting-
commercial break announcing about the other show that we usually have?
It should be.
we should
run
check
that
out
commercial.
California.
Yeah, I really okay.
Check
I'll
out
run-
California, where I co-host. Do you have a Check Out California?
I'm going to
thing?
find that while I'm running
Okay.
the other commercial.
So while
here. Okay.
while he's finding that, he's going to run another commercial, and we'll be right back with Dr. Jose Moreno.
I'm on the observation deck of the Empire State Building to demonstrate how much material Waste Management recycles. As North America's largest residential recycler, last year alone, Waste Management recycled 12.9 million tons. How much is that? Let's do the math. Carry the 6. It's enough to fill this building more than 27 times. With experience like that, we're bound to have a program that can help your business recycle. Talk to Waste Management or visit thinkgreen.com.
From Eureka to San Diego and Malibu to Bakersfield, the California Lodging Investment Conference, CLIC, is one of a kind, focusing exclusively on our Golden States hotel market. CLIC was launched in 2016 by Craig Sullivan, a seasoned hospitality industry professional, to harness the knowledge of our industry leaders, support our community, and educate emerging talent. CLIC brings together lodging professionals from California and beyond for one day of learning, professional development, and networking. If you are an owner, operator, investor, broker, developer, lender, management company, brand, or professional services provider, you should plan on attending Click 2 on March 8th, 2018 at the Hilton Irvine, Orange County Airport. We invite you to go check out the California Lodging Investment Conference website at cliconference.com for the latest details and sponsorship opportunities. Early registration now open, and as a listener of the Checkout California radio show, please make sure to use our exclusive discount code of CheckoutCA when registering for this one-of-a-kind California hospitality event that sold out in its very first year.
Oh, that ended quick. I wasn't ready for that.
Are we
one.
back?
We're back.
Did
Okay.
you run the Check Out California thing?
I just did.
Okay, all right.
It ended quickly.
I wasn't listening. That's how much I care about that show. No, Greg Sullivan.
Wow. Ouch.
Greg Sullivan. I didn't mean that. That's my co-host on Check Out California show. Actually, very apropos because we are talking to Dr. Jose Moreno
And we had somebody tweet in
Coun-
just a clarification on our previous conversation. So there was
there was somebody
a
listening to
a
us?
giveaway, as you call it. They would call it they tried to call it a rebate, but it was an incentive program to try and get Disney and others to build a 4-star hotel in Anaheim, which you wondered on your other show why there isn't a 4-star hotel in that market. Once you did a show, we talked about that once before.
but the thing about it.
So
thing
the question
about
they
it
wanted
is-
to know was, did that thing, when it was the rebate, was the giveaway, was the incentive taken away, and did that stop the progress of a 4-star hotel? Or
right,
is there
and
still
that
gonna
was the
be one?
question. Did it stop anything?
No, those agreements are agreements. We would be in breach of contract if the city. So the city already signed those contracts, those agreements. What it did is to stop the policy.
So again, to be clear, it didn't stop the 4-star hotels. It just stopped the policy, which the policy itself was gonna sunset at 2,000 rooms anyway. So you basically all you did is a little housekeeping and got rid of the paper that is no longer applicable because
Right.
there's already 2,000 rooms that have been spoken for.
Right. So it was big though. Symbolically, it's big to publicly say we are not interested in this policy.
Right.
As a new council, as a new seated council, that was important. I mean, that's why I feel I won.
So do you think there was a
part.
misunderstanding by people in the industry that basically because that policy was on the books that it would basically then translate to other projects?
Potentially.
And was that
And that expectation would grow, and then there'd be pressure on the council to have to
to
go ahead
basically not
and
not
The next
have
time.
it?
lift the cap and allow more.
Next
Got
time,
it.
yeah.
Yeah, potentially.
But when it was actually removed, it had already met its cap, and
Right.
the agreements are still in place for those hotels anyway.
The folks who lobbied for that got the outcome they were desiring.
They won.
And the folks who put in the money to get the election outcomes they wanted in 2016, we know that the Disney Corporation at that time spent record levels for itself, close to over $1 million in the elections of 2016 in the at-large system, to retain a majority of the council. And soon after that council was seated, within a year, they got a 45-year local tax exemption. They got this huge hotel subsidy, and so it was a great investment by Disney, right? They invested $1 million in the election, and they got a $280 million subsidy. That's pretty good return
That's a
on
good return
investment.
on investment.
So let me ask, maybe this is a third row question.
That's why I don't begrudge Disney. They're
Right.
just they're just incredible.
They know what they're doing.
Well,
business people.
Again, like
but I begrudge the fact that they act innocent in the process, and they're not. They have
So let
their
me ask the
interests.
if
third.
the process is in place, then not to take advantage of the process is almost kind of stupid. Unless I understand ethics and all this stuff, but what you're talking about is if the principle of something was in place, then you do it. It's like the lobbyists. Unless you have a sunshine ordinance on a city, then basically a lobbyist continue to do whatever they've been doing for decades in Orange County. Unless they have a personal, moral, ethical thing to not do that, why not?
Well, I think to answer your question, I do think it's stupid. I think at some point, greed overcomes you, and it undermines the very ethic that you built your franchise on.
And
Right?
you see, that's why we have
And
elected
so-
officials.
No. So even
As
for themselves,
gatekeepers.
if I'm at some point, you got to say, look, our housekeepers, our hotel servers, they're gonna end up living in a city that won't have the resources to support quality of life in their neighborhood. How does that help us as a company?
Oh, Chef
so-
Bruno Suerta was here. They're helping people get out of the motels by basically paying their first and last to get them into an apartment because people that are working don't have enough savings that they can basically move out of a motel situation.
Exactly.
I mean, that's how ridiculous it is.
And that's the question. So we and I applaud. By the way, I mean CNN Hero. I I think I mean I don't know him extremely well personally, but just an amazing man, You know,
Doing great work through his
immigrant
foundation.
entrepreneur, giving
Yeah.
back, right? Exactly the kind of ethic. But the fact that he has to do what he does says something about the structure of the economy we're in. And was once said by an archbishop in Brazil, Archbishop Camara, said, when I feed the poor, they call me a saint. When I ask why are the poor hungry, they call me a communist. So that's the question we're asking: why are the poor so hungry in Anaheim? And why is Bruno having to feed 1,000 kids every day?
Yeah, I mean, what kind of reflection on the city? I mean, the city
Correct.
itself should basically step up.
Well,
I gotta get this in.
The
This
city
is
and its industries.
This is
Yeah.
maybe the third rail in Anaheim politics.
Uh-oh.
But Disney is perceived by many of us, and has for a long time, as being this being a corporate town. It relies. Disney's far and away the largest employer. It's what everybody thinks of when they think of Anaheim, right? And I know they spend tons of money to maintain that power and position, and to make things work in their favor. And yet, right outside of the happiest place on earth, as you said, is the poorest part of Anaheim.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that ever? How do they address that? How do they deal with that? How do they talk about that? All these grand things they want to do, and I get it. It benefits everybody in Southern California, brings more tourism, employs more people, good stuff. But at the same time, right outside the gates is the poorest part of the community.
Yeah, but
Well, to its credit, it does a lot of charitable
Okay.
work. To its credit, they do some really amazing events out in parks in the summer. But I think our mantra has been for years that charity is necessary but not sufficient.
Right.
Charity should not be your social policy to assure that there's a sustained quality of life, a basic quality of life for people. So that's where we just asked Disney, you know, it's great that you provide some of these, they give backpacks to kids. They allow all sixth graders now into the park for a day. Kids who do community service, which is great. It promotes wonderful things. But again, it's charitable. It's one-time things. That
Right.
doesn't...
Does
Well, it's
Disney
just-
want to get involved in the community and enhance Disney's a corporation. They want to make money like every corporation does. Do they also want to enhance the community around them, which maybe makes better employees, makes a better tourist experience, makes them feel good as corporate partners, like you're saying? There's a certain
But
corporate ethic.
there's something
to
in
help.
there's something in your question in your question though, Paul, that alludes to the fact that they're not.
I don't know that they do. Yeah, I really don't know that they care outside.
So the
of
question
gates.
really is:
do they care or not?
do
I
they-
don't know.
And is it enough? Should it be more? I mean, obviously, charity is never enough, right? I mean,
Well, I'm not
It's
talking
never
about
enough.
charity, not just handing out like Bruno does. That's great. About, like he said, okay, so if you're going to get some hundreds of millions of dollars back to build a hotel, how does that translate into better lives for the community? If the community is going to donate this money to help you in your endeavor, how are they going to benefit other than just a few more jobs and maybe 20 years from now some higher bed taxes?
So that's the extent, I think, to which they think they're benefiting the community, which is indeed a benefit. It's a job, right? So it's these hotels, for example. The argument is, Disney overall, I think, is the largest employer in the county. I think about 5,000 or 6,000 employees in the city of who live in the city of Anaheim. So if you're going to bring 3,000 hotel employees, they're not going to be high-paying jobs. Some
No.
of them maybe, some of them management, some things, but for the most part, your hotel. Your housekeepers, your servers,
Low
and others
skilled, right.
are going to be low-skilled, low-wage jobs. So all I'm asking folks like Disney is to say, where do you plan on having your employees live? Who then makes sure, and how do we make sure that they have a place to live that
Right.
isn't with two other families? And if Disney's not interested in that conversation, then that speaks a lot about the character of the organization.
Right.
I would hope that they do want to have that conversation. But when you have it, you then have to talk about wages. You have to talk about, should Disney contribute to a housing fund? You have to talk, which they actually did initially in the first agreement. In the first agreement, in the draft level of the agreements, they had agreed to build 500 affordable housing units to help house the workers that would come into work.
Who otherwise
California
can't
Adventure,
afford to work there and live there.
who are going to come and work California Adventure.
Right.
Somehow that got off the final agreement, and it turned into the city using its own bond money to rehab some buildings across the street. So the city ended up doing everything on its own. And I think that's the struggle we're having, is just simply a little bit more structured corporate responsibility so that we don't bear the full burden of having to take on a poverty-based economy.
And the argument would be
Well,
also that if Disney did that, then maybe the employees would have better attendance rates. You'd have
But
better,
again,
happier
again,
employees, better employees.
The thing about this though is we're too focused. I understand we're talking about Anaheim. We're too focused on the fact that we're talking Disney.
Right.
Okay.
Well,
This conversation really is countywide. It's a conversation that's way past due, and it requires partnership on every level. Because
Certainly affordable housing,
these
yeah,
issues,
right.
these issues, and perfect example, the Santa Ana River situation with the homeless. Okay, when after decades and decades of basically burying our heads in the sand regarding our homeless situation as a humanitarian crisis in the county, that it actually only took action once legally a judge decided to pass a judgment. You have to do X, Y, and Z.
Right.
Now that effect of burying our heads in the sand and kicking the can down the road, which nobody wants to talk about because that is really exactly why we found ourselves where we were. Right. I'm not saying that every person that was in the Santa Ana riverbed basically wanted to be housed or wanted assistance, but there was a certain percentage that was. And here we are now where they are being housed across the county. And I've been hearing about people going, well, you know, how dare the county basically ship people, the homeless, down to our communities, blah, blah. Here's the thing, okay? Where they are being kept, in the motels or the hotels that are being kept in, those people that own those properties applied in order for them to be considered for housing for these homeless. So if you got to have a problem with somebody, go talk to the property owner that actually applied for this program instead of just picking on the homeless or the county. We all need to be participating in these solutions, okay? What happens in Anaheim happens in San Clemente. What happens in Santa Ana impacts everybody down in Mission Viejo. And the minute we stop thinking like that, or actually I should say the minute we start thinking like that, is when we start actually really changing some of the stuff. We're all in this together. The senior issue is the same thing. Housing is the same thing. Cost of medical is the same thing.
Except San Clemente. I don't really care what happens down there.
Well, you know what? I'll tell you something.
That's too far away.
You will when we start busing people up to you in Mission Viejo,
no.
right? In Rancho.
I don't care what goes
I mean,
on down
it
there.
really is these issues, these compounded issues, okay, are compounded in a big part because we have ignored them for so long.
So that's where it's troublesome in the regional approaches when you begin to see lobbying firms.
We got to get you a little closer to the mic. You're drifting away from the
that's
mic.
where it's really troubling to see and important for us to have these kind of sunshine lobbyist ordinances. By the way, the county has a pretty good lobbyist registry. They are required to register at the county level. It's pretty good.
Which is ironic, then it doesn't exist at the municipal level.
Right, and all the supervisors sit on the TCA.
Exactly.
So why hasn't been there? But regardless,
Right, the TCA doesn't have it.
So what's troubling is you have lobbyists who are shaping the policies of municipalities, and then those municipalities are being asked to come together, and those same lobbyists are now influencing the regional. And so what happens is the folks who are funding the lobbyists to do the lobbying end up being the ones who benefit the most from some of those policies. And here's an example that I'm
They set the agenda. They have an inside track on what's talked and what agreements are made.
And certain things become off limits. So, for example, right now the Association of California Cities of Orange County, ACCOC, is pulling.
Did a show with us for 2 years here.
Yeah.
Right?
So they're pulling. They're doing a lot of really interesting and cool work, pulling cities together to talk about homelessness from a regional approach.
Mm-hmm.
And they're talking now about cities sharing the load of permanent supportive housing. I think they're saying if we build 2,700 units of permanent supportive housing, we could resolve today's homeless problem. I don't know if it resolves it tomorrow, but certainly today's. So you look at it and say that sounds really, really great. But part of the problem is that folks aren't building affordable housing.
Well, it's in lieu of, right? I mean, it's in
lieu of.
Write a check,
We just write a check, and then the city handles it.
So you said earlier, that municipalities, council members shape policy, but it's also the absence of policy that hurts us. So in Anaheim, we have an absence of an affordable housing policy. So about 17,000 plus units have been permitted to be built in the city of Anaheim, mostly in the Platinum Triangle. Not one of those 17,000 units is an affordable housing unit. Not one, because we don't have a policy on it. We have an interest and encouragement to, hey, come on, we need this, but it's not going to happen if they're not required. That's clear by the record, right? The market will
and
not,
the fascinating
will not bear
thing
it.
is in those cities that have it, there has been an in lieu of clause.
Right, but
So
at the very least,
we still don't have the
no,
inventory.
but at the very least, they have to pay something into a fund that allows the city to start developing a fund, so the city might end up building it somewhere, right? Although those fees are so low that it's going to take decades to get enough of a funding.
Except here's what happens. I mean, we have a situation like that in San Clemente, right? And there's I believe I may be misspeaking, but there's an in lieu of. The minute a project comes up that's called affordable housing, you might as well say tenement. You might as well say, like projects, right? A Spanish Revival 2-story, higher density project in an area that is somewhat sensitively applied given the architectural overlay is now regarded as the biggest bane on the existence, the biggest, scarlet letter development, anything, you name it, because it's called affordable housing. Now, here's where the insanity is for me. When you don't have affordable housing, the people that were born and raised in those communities, and let's preface this, $86,000 on a joint income in Orange County qualifies you for assistance.
A starting teacher requires low-income housing.
Right.
A starting policeman is starting.
Right. So we're not talking about like housekeeping only. We're talking about people that are professionals that are touching our children. In a very impactful.
Don't say touching.
No, I was going to say in a very in a very impactful way and a very impressionable years. Right. Yeah, right. They're shaping the future of this county, and yet these people with these kids, that are born and raised in these communities, to where they cannot, unless they happen to be fortunate enough that their parents can somehow subsidize or help them, they, when they get of age, cannot actually contribute and give back to that community, both in payroll taxes as well as leadership.
They got to leave.
They got to leave and go to the desert. That is a ridiculous situation that it really has ramifications down the road for us all.
We're going to be one big sun city.
So here's what's going to happen.
All
these people that already have
that's what creates the traffic that requires and gives the impetus for toll roads.
Right. although the word mobility with the M, in my mind, it's not the M is not about mobility. It's about money when it comes to the friggin' TCA, right?
That's what Treasure M.
And if you don't believe me, follow the money and see the connections. But the thing about this is we're not doing ourselves a favor when we're basically not dealing with things like affordable housing.
Right.
Okay? Because it's not the person who's the bum from God knows some other town that's going to come in basically and take advantage of our affordable housing. It's the born and raised in that community. Yeah. The people that played on the varsity soccer team or football team that cannot basically afford to live there, and they're going to go somewhere else. So you communities that are so proud of yourselves, are going to end up with leadership that's coming from somewhere else that can afford to buy into that community.
Right.
And it's going to change the whole culture of the community.
Right.
And it's going to be older.
And heaven forbid we should talk about services and amenities because on the fact that we're aging communities. All of these conversations, then the more we bury our heads in the sand and avoid talking to them about the lobbying component, about things that are fairness and equality, district, representative democracy.
I guess the question I'm left with is who benefits from us burying our heads in the sand?
Yes.
Who benefits? That's the question I constantly ask myself around
Good
policies,
question.
around.
The answer is money. What was the question?
Around proposes. Who benefits from that? Some of it's financial, but some of it's political, right? So
even if it's insane, why somebody's benefiting from that insanity?
Right. So, for example, you won't levy a critique of the economics of a Disney, or the economics of an Irvine company, or 5-Star, or a toll road, of an Orange County Business Council. You won't critique that if your political ambition says you want to go somewhere else, higher, because that's where the big money is really needed. I mean, you just need it, and so
Orange County is a stepping stone.
So for many
lower offices, a stepping stone for most.
So for many, the municipal offices become stepping stones to supervisor seats, to state assembly, statewide seats,
congressional
seats. So you can maybe be protected by your voters locally because they really want you to take on the company town, the corporate control of local politics, but you're going to need them later. So then that really mitigates and really moderates the extent to which you can really pull your head out of the sand and really engage. So I think we have to look at it from not just who benefits financially, but who benefits politically, who benefits from getting invited.
Very good point.
Very good point.
Who benefits from getting invited to VIP galas, to have wine with the president, CEOs of, and that's hard. So essentially, it becomes it's very hard to sustain and live within the sense of always being the skunk in the lawn party. Right?
I don't. Yeah,
Skunk
yes,
in the
on
lawn
party.
party,
Yeah. No, here's the thing, right? The reality of life is that there are situations where people are going to basically try to reach and have influence. Okay, they're going to try to be basically invited to be seated at the table.
Right.
I mean, the way that whether it's called excelling or reaching for higher goals or whatever you want to call it, right? That's part of human nature. So I'm not begrudging people doing that. What I'm saying is there needs to be some sort of checks and balances when it starts harming us in the long term, because it's really not a sustainable situation. Perfect example is this thing with the homeless. I mean, we kicked it down the road for 20, 30 years, and it was not a sustainable way to basically go about it, and here we are now basically all being impacted by it, right? To say nothing about this sort of the moral thing to do of dealing with a humanitarian problem. Just as a problem, it has just become, I mean, I think every parent tells a child, right, you got a situation, deal with it now because it just becomes worse, deal with it later, right? I mean, that's just common sense. So with it being an election year, okay, with it being, and by the way, let me just say this. The last thing I will say about all of this conversation we're having is that some people are going to listen to this and go, oh my God, socialism, communism, all this stuff, right? I will tell you.
That's what you find at San Clemente. That's San Clemente politics.
You know what? I will
right
tell you something. I'll tell you something. As a fiscal conservative, social liberal, okay, that basically believes in small government, okay, and not a lot of regulations, I will tell you this, okay? I think it is completely irresponsible and fiscally irresponsible that we do not basically put in some of these policies, because it's costing us, the county, everything, much more money dealing with this thing 20 years from now than actually putting our heads together and coming up with a solution that is sustainable.
You know, the one conversation, though, that fits that paradigm, that people are looking at it from an economic and not just a moral standpoint, at least I see from sitting in this chair all day, is homelessness. You have a wide spectrum of interest from Republican cities and police organizations.
Caveat, you have a wide spectrum of interest now.
Well, I'm just saying that's a change. In a world where supposedly left and right, Democrats and Republicans...
I'll tell you what.
Wait a minute, let me finish.
A year from now, when that interest is still sustained, and it's not an election year, come talk to me.
I think it will
because
be.
right now...
No, I think you're being too cynical. I think there's an awful lot of...
I am jaded and cynical,
I think
and I will
there's
admit
an awful lot of people in this community, both left and right, rich and poor, business and church organizations, who we see come through here every week, and they all are espousing, let's do something about homelessness because of the cost of it, because of the impact of it, because of the moral aspect of it. And I haven't seen that happen on any other topic.
What's the lyrics from Elvis Presley? A little less talk and a lot more action.
No, but I think they are. Like he's saying, the Association of California Cities has done its work. United Way has tackled this thing. You've got little groups all over the place.
No, United Way has just, with the study they commissioned with UCI, that was a game changer.
Yeah, really is. No, I think you're not recognizing this is a game changer. This is more than talk.
Show me, don't snow me. At this point, as a voter, I'm basically jaded to the fact that I have heard a lot of promises. Yeah. And I haven't seen action.
They've gone beyond
meaningful, quantifiable, measurable.
First,
action.
they got to study it, and they got to come up with some ideas, and I think that's what.
Oh wait, more consultants getting paid.
Right. That's true.
That's true.
Going back to your point, though, about folks listening, socialist, but I just remind folks that the biggest champion against these corporate subsidies and economic incentive programs, the biggest opponent to all of this in Anaheim was Tom Tate and folks around him in that community of Republicans, who I believe are being honest Republicans, libertarian leaning, and their concern about it is, you're skewing the market. Government should not be picking
winners and losers.
Winners and losers.
You can't be conservative and bilk the system. I mean,
right. And so you can't, as a conservative, fiscal conservative or libertarian, and the role of government, be sitting there and allow an oligarchy to develop. Right. I mean, that's what you have. So what I respect a lot about what our mayor has done and others around him, and then Democrats who are trying to take that on as Bernie-crats, is we both come together on the idea that we don't like big government and we don't like big business telling people what to do and how to do it. People should be deciding that together. So
big starts thinking about themselves and less about the community. All right, so I got to bring this up since we have a public official here and who has been bold enough and with us enough to tackle some of the third rails here that nobody wants to talk about. Wall Street Journal writes yesterday in the paper, Democrats seek California gains. The nationwide, they got to take back 24 seats to flip the House. 10 of those seats are targeted in California, and of the 10, 4 are right here in Orange County. The mantra is orange is the new blue. Is that really true or not? Are they going to be able to flip all 4? 2 of the 4 seats were Dana Rohrabacher. The 4 seats are Dana Rohrabacher and Mimi Walters, who are running for re-election, and the 2 that aren't, Ed Royce, who shocked everybody by not running again, and your friend Darrell Issa. I point to Rod. So 4 Republican seats
should have said the new purple.
are being targeted. Of the 10 in California, 4 of them are here in Oregon, and if they take most or all of those 10 seats, then the House will most assuredly flip Democratic. Is orange the new blue? This has been red for as long as I can remember living here.
I think for those of us who feel that certainly our currently elected president and the current Congress, orange is the new hope.
Oh, wow.
Honestly, I just, I'm a Democrat. I've been a Democrat for several years. I was independent, but decided that, I think that I believe in the platform the Democratic Party puts out, and I want to fight for that platform. It doesn't always practice it. Again, in Anaheim, we struggled with, and in Orange County, with Democrats who continuously support corporate tax giveaways. And it was Democrats who enacted a law on corporate charters and didn't provide any real transparency or accountability laws around those charters. It's Democrats who doubled down on testing in California. It's Democrats at the federal level who doubled down on state testing as a measure of school quality, which has created a lot of problems for teachers to do real learning, teaching and learning. So we both have our problems. So I'm just hopeful that I think on the Democrat side that we could at least bring some balance to Congress. Right now there's an imbalance. Certainly our local congresspersons are not voting, I think, the values of what we have.
Mimi Walters did vote for the tax plan
these tax cuts
that had greater impact on us than other parts of the country. She did apparently support the reopening of a drilling off the coast that the Trump administration has put forward.
But that they won't criticize the president just because they're the same party. That's what bugs me. It's like, if you're really about representing your district or people or just the oath you took for office, you have a president who is just off the rails, and that they won't critique him because they're the same party. Just says they're putting
keep him on the rails.
Keep him on the rails. So they're putting party over people, and that's where I think.
I think there's a day.
We've moved in a good direction.
I think there's a day of reckoning, man. I'm telling you. I think there's a day of reckoning, and this isn't something that's just happenstance. I have been watching. You agree with me or not on this, but I've been watching in South County, the bastion, the boilerplate of conservative Republican Orange County, right? Mm-hmm. I have been watching the GOP shed members over the last 10 years, over a decade.
Very much so.
And it escalated more recently. And here's the thing about when you abandon party. Unless you are looking at it in terms of a path to election, which means, you want to basically be involved and be able to vote in a primary and so forth, once you abandon party, once your engagement in civic responsibility and awareness is such that you are taking the time, educating yourself, learning about the issues, learning about the candidates, not just waiting for a party as a clearinghouse to basically give you the information in snippets and a cheat sheet. Once you do that, it's harder to go back to where you are now basically party loyalty above all else.
Right.
And you may vote for a person, quote-unquote, Republican, Independent, Green Party, whatever, depending on where they stand and what the position they're going for. The minute we start doing that, and it's getting there, we're about 30-30-30,
yeah.
I think. Okay?
We were at one point in 1992, according to this article.
That's going to change the dynamic of how you run as a candidate, because you can't just run for your party base when you need that independent voter. Now, granted, the independent voter may lean conservative, centrist, liberal, all across the board, but how do you even gauge that, right?
So
you got to run on the issues.
According to the article here, in 1992, we were almost 60% Republican of the registered voters.
Oh, this is the one that has the graph, right?
Yeah. And and at that time we were about a little 25, almost 30, a little over 30% Democrat. The Democratic line has stayed steady. The Republican line has dropped from about almost 60 to around 40%. And the independent went from almost 0 in 1992, 5% or something, to, as you said, roughly around
And
a third.
this was written up on in a report that was done, I believe, by UCI and UCLA joint committees. They did a report called "The Changing Face of Orange County."
That's the UCI Labor Center.
Labor Center.
The Orange County Labor Federation.
When was that? About like 4 or 5 years ago?
Maybe 4 years ago.
Yeah, so 4 years ago. And anybody who's listening to the show, I urge you to go and look at that. You can download the PDF. You can look at it. From 4 or 5 years ago, it was called "The Changing Face of Orange County."
Right.
Right? And look at that. There's a lot of information there. Read between the lines on there. This is a trend. Okay? And if we in quote-unquote conservative Orange County are experiencing this, unless you are absolutely partisan one way or the other area in the country, I will guarantee you this is not a unique situation that's going on in the
But
United
are we a
States.
precursor
Let
to
me
what's
see that
going to happen
newspaper,
in the
please.
country, or are we? A fascinating article. This was in Tuesday, February 27th, Wall Street Journal.
I
Democrats
just want to share the graph on the camera. Go ahead, Jose.
I think just increasingly folks are frustrated with big money controlling issues.
Like you said, the Bernie-crats and the Trumpites both kind of united on that issue here. Right, supposedly.
I wouldn't say the Trumpites. I would
Well,
say,
the
I would say
voters did, yeah.
libertarians more.
Yes,
for
right.
that. So it just seems that people are beginning, as you said earlier in the show, they're focusing more on the issues, the day-to-day. And frankly, it's because it's now impacting middle-class America. They didn't care about this previously. It's now hitting them. We're seeing this in the great response by the youth in Florida. I saw this great article of how Black Lives Matter and youth and communities of color have been pushing these kind of gun things for a long time, and no one's paid attention to it. The media doesn't cover it. In fact, it actually vilifies them for doing so. And these middle-class kids from Florida decide they're going to take on Congress. It's like, oh my God, this is a new wave. So it seems like better late than never, I guess.
Let me bring up one other.
Well, I think that's just the nature of evolution, right? It takes the time and the course, and there's some catalyst moments that.
Well, until it hits the dominant cultural space.
Yeah.
Right. Until it's the old saying of the canary in the mine, right? Mm-hmm. It's until the canary's dead, do you then say, oh my gosh, we might be next? And so.
I mean, I'll tell you. I mean, just as sort of a very close proximity observer to this and involved in it. It's going to be very interesting for me to see, and I'll go back to the toll road situation just because of this. In San Clemente, last couple election cycles, there was a lot of polarization based on either ideology or whatever, right? The fact that we have one issue, which is the potential running of a toll road through San Clemente, the unification of that across the board. I want to send a friggin' thank you card to the TCA, basically, thank you for unifying San Clemente, because it doesn't matter. You got
rich or poor,
black or
white,
white, conservative, liberal, Green Party, whatever. They're lockstep on one issue, and it really is almost a litmus test down there. At this point in 2018, if you are not vocally out against this risk of running a toll road to San Clemente, it doesn't matter anything else. Yes, there are some that are hardcore. They're like, no, I still won't vote for a Democrat, or whatever, but there are a lot of people that are going to vote on an issue that impacts them, regardless of party affiliation.
So the jury's out whether California is setting a trend
at county level, at municipal level, congressional level.
But your argument is that this is going to start a wave like Prop 13 did across the country. California, as goes California, so goes the nation. I don't know yet. Most of the country's very ethnically polarized, politically polarized, and we're becoming more pure in wherever you live. We're all of a certain type. So, which brings up my last question. I gotta bring this up, and I hope this doesn't offend anybody here. But I represent, as I say in the show all the time, I represent the group. I grew up with all these people who voted for Trump back in the Midwest. All my friends and family and relatives, middle-class people who I think have lost their mind, and they think I've lost my mind. Don't you see this? He's the savior of this previous way of life. And I said, what is this way of life that you're defending? And without saying it, it's where it was a majority of people look just like us. It was a white, middle-class, male-oriented society, and that's what dominated America since the beginning. So I say to them, I could never live in California. Oh, my God. And one of the reasons they can't live here is this statistic listed in this article. The growth in Orange County's Latino population reflects the state overall, as the number of Latinos in California passed the number of whites as of June 2014. I am now, we are a minority county, perhaps, and certainly state. Should I be shocked? Should I be scared? Should I be rallying against all these rising groups? Why don't I feel afraid that there are more Latinos and Arabs and Muslims and Mexicans and all this? Why are so many of us so scared of this? I'm not frightened. I don't fear diversity. I welcome it. But so many are terrified of it.
You know, if you watch Game of Thrones, it's this, winter is coming.
Yeah.
Sky is falling.
The Earthlings are coming, and it just
exactly.
And I think that's why it's not surprising for me at least, it's not surprising how the electorate nationally went, or at least certain states, because not the electorate. Right? We know he lost the popular vote,
right.
But that certain states went a certain direction. It's been building up. It's not that
absolutely.
It's not
back in Michigan and Ohio, where I come from, absolutely.
So they've been fanning this rhetoric and setting up the structures for this kind of electorate. They condition the electorate to produce this outcome, so it's not a surprise to
They've
anyone.
had a law.
Well, streaming talk radio for 20 years.
Right.
I mean,
and they blame it on people. You got to blame it on somebody.
But also don't forget that Republicans have been working for 15, 20 years to take control of state houses, which then changed voting rights laws, voting polls, where the polls were located.
And shame on Obama for letting that happen over 8 years.
They cleared rolls, right? And then also, shame on Obama in terms of all the way that he did the bailout and the way that he ended up doing Obamacare and the way that
he also deported a lot of people.
And you deport 3 million people, you depress things. And so, but nonetheless, Obama did some really cool things, but the conditions that were said about how Trump himself was using the rhetoric against Obama, the conditions were set. And
I agree.
And I think that, frankly, we ignored that.
So I wish if you want to,
I think we're in disbelief that we were at the stage that we were at, and I think there's
on both parties. Both parties
couldn't. But there's also, I think, a part of it that is very much a moment in history, right? And that is that we cannot avoid anymore the changing face of the United States, the diversity extent of the United States, and in some places, change, which is a very scary thing for human beings, regardless.
Because some lose.
Okay,
some win.
People are averse to change, and somebody is asked to be adjusting their reality, and it's unavoidable anymore. So now it's either I react to it or I completely feel like I'm overwhelmed by it. Right? That's the truth, though, is this. We don't have an option. You change. You either participate in change or change rolls over you.
Yeah.
Okay. This is not a condition of 2018 United States. This is a historical condition.
But the famous line that William F. Buckley said about conservatives' role is to stand astride the sea of history, like holding back the tide, and say stop.
And how's that worked out?
Well, again, just bringing it more locally, I just feel really optimistic that people are paying a lot more attention to issues, and I think people are asking for more thoughtful conversation.
Let me go back. I just got to make my one little soap opera speech here. Yeah. I'm the one in the room here.
You've had three.
One's Hispanic. You're from an Arab Palestinian background. I'm the white Anglo old male.
Why are you segregating? And
I'm just saying, if we want to talk that way. So
I didn't start talking that way.
Here's what I say to my friends.
He just gave himself permission to talk that way.
America was founded. The tribe called America is not based on what language we speak, who we pray to, or where we come from. It's based on 3 principles. If you believe in freedom, opportunity, and equality, you're in the tribe. Welcome. You joined the group. I don't care who you pray to or who you sleep with or any of that stuff. Why suddenly have we gone back to this idea that America has to be white, male-dominated?
Gee, we never really.
Christian.
Let me correct.
And not just my kind of Christian, evangelical Christian.
Let me correct you. I know you're standing on your soapbox, but let me correct you for a minute, right? There's a difference that I always found very fascinating between the United States philosophy of the United States and philosophy of a place like Canada.
Okay.
We always say that the United States is a melting pot.
Yes.
Canada doesn't refer to itself as a melting pot.
No.
It refers to itself as a mixing pot.
Oh,
okay.
That's interesting. I never heard that.
The United States, if you are an American citizen, you're supposed to be part of a melting pot. You know what happens in a melting pot? Every individual ingredient gets lost into the making of the overall ingredient.
Right.
A mixing
becomes
pot
bland.
A mixing pot is a dish served up with all the ingredients in it still recognizable, but coming together offering a unique.
You can still taste
flavor.
the different spices. They haven't all blended
Right.
away.
So I
Yeah.
don't agree that this is new. I think where it is the confrontation of the fact that there's a diversity and an ethnicity in the United States today that nobody can ignore anymore. Okay, and it is not going to change unless white America decides to have 4 or 5 kids really fast,
Right.
per person. The demographics are not in favor of that. Now that doesn't mean that one is overtaking the other, because the ethnic
And one
component,
wins and one loses.
quote
yeah.
unquote, the ethnic component strives to basically stand for the American example, for the American
Exactly.
dream, for
Anybody
all
can
those
come
things
here.
that are shared experience. So for us to basically self-segregate like that is kind of sad, other than the fact that it's foolish and it's not going to lead to anything. So I refer to the period that we're going through, to be honest, and it is a violent period in sort of a certain way, is this is the death kicks. This is the last hold on, right? But at the end of the day, be it a year, be it 10, we're going to transition past this.
I
There's
hope
no
so,
there's no way of
because-
going back.
Because worldwide, we seem to see a rise of authoritarianism, a rise of the strong man from China to Russia to Trump here in this country. And with that is the understanding of tribalism. And tribalism suggests homogenous groups. Everybody looks and acts and believes exactly the same, and that we are fearful of outsiders and others who don't act and look like us.
Every time that human history did this,
The 30s.
it was a hiccup, an attempt, a futile attempt to stop progress that was
Yeah.
going to happen regardless.
And a reaction to economic change. The
What do you-
30s was
well, okay.
was a reaction to the Depression.
Not-
I
yeah.
guess I just go back to, I just look at who's benefiting from the chaos. And you look at who creates the chaos and who benefits from it. And so I think I was Naomi Klein wrote a book, The Shock Doctrine,
Exactly.
that our foreign policy was based on destabilizing economies, so that folks get so desperate they're willing to take whatever medicine you want for their economy. And that's where the International Monetary Funds and the World Bank just kind of go in and create these loan structures. And we certainly see it here. I mean, to the extent that the homeless situation was allowed to go as far as it can, you could say it was just incompetent. I think at some point you got to look at it and say, now we're desperate for any solution, right? That now we're under the dictates of a federal judge, and I think he's doing great, by the way. But ultimately, somebody's going to benefit from that, and the ones that continue to get hurt are the folks who don't have direct access to those decision makers. And I think, again, just bringing it home to Anaheim again, and I think that's our struggle, and that's our work. One of the exciting things, just to go back to the beginning of the show, is when we started this district elections movement in the city, or at least around municipal elections, there was not one Orange County city that had by-district elections. Not one out of the 34.
And how many you have now?
We were the first because of that. Now I believe there's 11 going on 12.
Wow. Of 34.
Yeah,
Right.
so it's just, San Juan Capistrano, did it. San Clemente, unfortunately, or Mission Viejo, unfortunately, decided not to go that route. So there'll be a lawsuit continuing there, I'm
Well,
sure.
there was a discussion in San Clemente. It didn't really go far anywhere.
Yeah.
There was also discussion about the term limits that then it didn't go anywhere. I mean, there are some certain things that I think are critical to sustaining the democracy in its
To
most
keeping
practical,
it from
not only
turning
purest
into
form.
a rig system,
Yeah,
as so many like to say these days.
I mean,
right?
that's just the way it is. Now, let's just bring it back to this, because I want to ask you. Now,
we got about 5 minutes
right.
to go.
You've had 2 years on city council,
a year and
almost 2 years.
a year and 3 months.
Okay, a year and 3 months.
That's not
And for people, you know what? And I really definitely don't want to shortchange you, because I was there when you got seated. Okay,
Right.
and I could not believe it. I
Right.
mean, it was like, what the heck just happened, right? So for those who don't know, Dr. Moreno basically got elected. It was a very tight race. It was a lot of all the stuff that we were talking about. Okay.
I liked it when they ran another candidate using his same name to try and split the vote.
Right, they even ran another candidate.
So
right?
there were 2 Jose
Right,
Morenos on
right.
the ballot.
But he got seated, and then because they were transitioning from non-district, from at-large to districts, somebody had to basically run again
Right.
in 2 years, and they did a blind draw,
Mm.
And the gentleman sitting across from me
Mr.
ends
Lucky.
up being Mr. Lucky, not, and getting picked. And so
Right.
he's running again in 2018.
That's correct.
So how has been the experience? Is it what you expected? Is it better? Is it worse? And we don't necessarily need to get into
Or what
exacts,
surprised
right,
you the
because
most
of the
out of
time
it?
frame. And then what are your expectations? I mean, how are you looking forward to this thing in 2018? I mean, you have no choice if you're running for re-election. Do you?
Yeah, so it's everything I expected. I think a lot of things that I thought were happening were confirmed. It was amazing to watch how much influence
Power has.
Right, was had by corporate entities and lobbyists, and it also confirmed for me that the staff that actually work in the city, the mid-level, the frontline folks, are just amazing people who have had to work under a condition that was so highly politicized, and so hopefully now we've supported.
They just want to do their job. They want to give permits and make it effective.
Really working to unleash their talents in a way that really is about the entire city, not just about one area or one interest or set of interests. So nothing surprising there. It was more affirmation. What I have found surprising is how well received the district election environment has been throughout the city.
Mm-hmm.
How quickly folks have moved towards thinking both about their own area, but saying, expecting more of their elected officials. That's great because that creates more accountability.
And do they accept that by acknowledging diversity, by electing diversity, there will be more disagreement and more debate and more discussion, or do they roll their eyes and say,
so
more of the same?
Right. So our council meetings are running 7 to 8 hours. We start at 5, often end at midnight, and so blogs and people who have a really bad interest, to me, a corruptive influence on our body politic, try to highlight that as, this is a dysfunctional council. And it's like, no, this is called democracy. We're deliberating, we're arguing, we're discussing.
We're disagreeing, working it out.
Right. It's a shift in the city council of its values, of its focus, its priorities. And of course, what is now the minority, considered the minority part of the council, is just fighting tooth and nail for the interests that they have been funded.
Well, and democracy is a messy process.
Very messy.
Right. So I think it's cool. I found it really exhilarating and exciting.
Any positive? Well, you say the positive thing was that the people have accepted districting and haven't resisted it. Now they're thinking that way.
We're seeing the benefits of it, right? We have our councilwoman on the west side immediately agendized investments in just basically cleaning up the park bathrooms. They were just ridiculous. She showed pictures, and bam, right away it got done. And we just had a review of it last night. We have a park strategic plan that was proposed by another council member. I've been pushing affordable housing, homelessness issues, and council has moved on that direction with the working group that we did. I've been pushing more neighborhood investments. Rethinking public safety in our city, so it's not just about hiring more officers, but public safety, thinking if you do neighborhood investments, that itself
improves
helps.
The conditions. Yeah.
So I feel like we're having conversations in our city that perhaps from the dais that I don't feel have been had, at least since I've been in Anaheim for 15 years. And it's exciting that we can have and ask questions from the dais that people were afraid to.
What about the other? Anaheim is not just Hispanic and Anglo. I always hate the term white, but anyway, it's because white and black just suddenly you've separated people. You can't be anything in between. Well, whatever the Europeans and the heritage and the Hispanic heritage, but there is a large Asian community there. There's certainly Little Arabia, as you talk about there. There are other rising, growing ethnic components that don't seem to have found a voice or risen up yet to claim a stake in this discussion.
Right. So my hope is that, I mean, the fact is 55% of the electorate of the city is Latino, and if the majority of the city largely felt it didn't have a voice, then my goodness, if you're 20%, if you're 15%,
right? Exactly.
Whether it had a voice or not is even in the argument. It's the perception they're in.
Right.
So so I think that to the extent that learning that we know, let's not replicate that very process. That we're constantly looking to say how do we create inclusive policies, inclusive environments.
With other rising groups, the Arab American groups in the community, the Vietnamese and the other Asian groups.
But then we also don't let that limit us either, right? So we're not just balkanizing folks. We're saying, okay, how do we assure that we don't systematically create some exclusion or marginality to any particular group that identifies with a particular affinity? So that I think that ethic is something that I think some of us enter with because we experienced it.
Mm-hmm.
So knowing that we want to avoid the abuse becoming the abuser kind of thing,
Right.
that we trying to be very thoughtful to say, well, okay, well let's look at that and let's be open about it.
Because as Hispanic gets more empowered, they might say, well, we don't want Vietnamese rising up now. Here, this is we
Right.
fought to claim this title, and we don't want
That's
other
right.
ethnic groups to
That's
come
right.
in,
That's right.
or
And-
Arab Americans or whatever.
And so for me, this period of being why I decided to run, in addition to removing an incumbent that I felt was just really not to the interest of the city or my area where I live, is this is the transitional period, and the most critical period of any transition and change is how then you set up a new way.
Mm-hmm.
And the mayor has done this great job in his period to talk about kindness, and remind us, let's be kind, let's be kind.
And he's a Republican,
and
right?
he's a Republican, right? And so
Which
he-
doesn't represent kindness. Their party right now is not, from a national level down, is not speaking to the issue of kindness. This isn't
so
compassionate
But
conservatism.
again,
So-
again, all news is local news, right?
Yeah, that's
you know,
right.
so from that approach,
politics
it's
is
how do we use a kind approach around inclusivity? We experience going to council and saying, hey, can you think differently about these subsidies? No. Hey, can you look at housing and the condition of housing in this part of the city? No. Hey, do you really need to invest in dog parks right now when we don't even have well-seated parks for our kids? No. So, hey, can you really look at the police department? We think that they may be kind of killing a bit too many folks. No. So that approach we know wasn't helpful to the residents overall and didn't help to bring people together, create a division. I think now when people come and say, hey, we have a problem with a part of the city, we're saying, tell us about it. Let's explore it. City manager, can you look at that? And I
May
think
not agree with you, but I'll listen to
may
you.
not agree. Or if you're going to say that something's happening, we're going to actually pursue it. And if it's not true, we're going to say it's not true. But we're not going to just assume it's not true.
Right.
So I think if we work from that ethic, I think we're going to live
So
out the
what
promise of
do you,
districts.
what are you anticipating for your run for re-election? How do you
Well,
anticipate
you
the
know,
campaign to go?
I've continued to be vocal about what I think of as limitations in our current economy and how it's structured. I've continued to be vocal about ideas of how we can invest. I continue to say to people, we've invested over $1 billion in the children of tourists. It's time to invest in the children of Anaheim, and that still holds
And
true
I don't know
for me.
whether he wants to acknowledge this, but he did switch party. He's now a Republican. He's accepting PAC money, and that's how he's going to guarantee that he stays in power forever.
It took
here.
1 year and 3 months.
And he got
Yeah.
co-opted. He's part of the
It
system.
just took one bite of that tri-tip,
That's right.
like
and
the
he's now-
Matrix, right?
He's
So
joined.
no, and then of course what's next is not just my own reelection, but this majority that we have that is really focused on saying, we want to move in this direction. The mayor in the state of the city said he's been saying for a couple of years we're pivoting. We were pivoting towards the neighborhoods. We're pivoting towards the city,
Yep.
and not just focusing on one part. And he was vilified for it. And then the electorate supported him by putting in a majority with him. Now he said at the state of the city, he said we have pivoted, like it's done. Our investments will go towards entrepreneurship locally, small business folks, supporting them, deregulating things that may get in their way, investing in the neighborhoods. We have, of course, really embedding kindness as an institutional culture so that it lives on beyond him, because it's really more an ethic than it is
Do
about a
people
person.
laugh at that?
Well, and,
do,
and,
do-
and when he says beyond him is because Mayor Tate is actually terming
He's
out.
terming
do
out.
people laugh at that when they broke kindness?
Not anymore. Not anymore. They used to, but not anymore, because it's real. You feel it through these acts that have been happening. And then lastly, that in that ethic of kindness, that we've also moved into becoming a welcoming city. It's called the Welcoming America Initiative. We're now a city that has bought into it formally, where we look at immigrants as an integral part of our city, and that we want to shape policies and shape some programming and initiatives that seek to integrate immigrant communities, not assimilate, but integrate immigrant communities into the fabric of our city, so that they can become, and we could build on their entrepreneurial spirit, their sense of family, their sense of culture and language, so that we can all really benefit
So
from
I
each
think
other's
that's the
assets.
cultural crossroads we're at, America and all the way down to locally. Is diversity good, or is diversity a threat?
Diversity is always good. It's always a threat to
Established interests.
to established interest. Right.
I'll put it in a different way for those who basically may consider diversity as a threat. Okay. Do you consider competition as a threat, or do you consider competition as an incentivizer
Ooh.
to be better.
Yeah, I can see that.
Interesting way to look at it.
Right, because we never those
That's a
those who
very
are
good way to
very
look at it.
those are who are very principled, okay, look at competition as being it's a healthy thing,
Sharpens the saw.
right?
Right.
Competition is additional people from different things basically challenging for resources.
Forces you to be
for
on the-
markets. So it
do
forces
your
you to
best,
be
right.
the better at what you do. Diversity is very similar.
Right. So I think going back to the elections question. So for me, it's not only for me District 3, and I'm sure they'll come at things like they did last time, and I hope that the record we've already set shows voters that.
They're going to have 3 Jose Morenos on the
yeah,
ballot this time.
Yeah. But the other thing is that there's 4 seats up overall. There's the mayor's seat, District 2, which is the Midwest part of Anaheim, my district, District 3, and District 6, the Hills. And so for me, it's really important for the city and the electorate of each of those districts, and then the at-large for the mayor, look at, do we want to continue in the authentic, established policy direction that this majority has put in place, or do we want to return to a culture of rhetoric that we care about neighborhoods while we're supporting corporate subsidies, while we're supporting giveaways, while we're supporting lobbyists, while we're supporting big money politics. And I'm hopeful and optimistic that I think the district election system is taking hold in a way that local people in their district will ask, well, who's funding your campaign? And that won't be the litmus test for me, but then what policy you're proposing, and I want to see how that policy aligns with the people funding your campaigns.
Right. Becomes clear what
And
your
it's-
real
and it-
motivation
and
is.
it's the days of elect me and I'll show you are over.
Those days are over. People don't trust it. So it's going to
Rod
be really
doesn't trust it.
interesting.
Look, every time I challenge and they say they're trying to
No,
talk
you gotta-
about
you- you-
homelessness.
you-
You're
you-
like,
you
tell
gotta-
me,
you
show
gotta-
me.
look, if you want the seat, okay, you got to kind of work for it. You got to show me what it is that you're bringing to it. The days of popularism and oh yeah, you look great, petting a dog and kissing a baby are over.
And I got a certain
okay?
letter next to my name, and so do you. I get in.
I, as a voter, I'm jaded. I don't believe anything. And if it wasn't for the fact that I wasn't born from this country, I would probably be born in Missouri. And so, show me, don't snow me. And so, you got to do that to get me to vote for you.
Which is
I'm
why
not
you're
going
an
to buy.
independent.
I'm not going to
Yeah.
buy into the fact that you're going to show me once you're in the seat and you have the ability to do something. No. If you're motivated to do something, you have showed it through either volunteerism, through involvement with a nonprofit, through participating and showing up at city council, by putting out motions and resolutions and proposing dialogue and engaging in a narrative. If you are not able to do that, then why the heck should I give you the responsibility to represent me?
Well, I hope that similar to what you're saying in San Clemente, which I don't know, litmus tests are going to be created.
Yeah.
That I hope the question voters will ask is, where were you when?
Yeah.
Right? Where were you when? Not show me that you could take a nice picture at the park with your family, or show me that you could take a nice picture looking like you're talking to voters. Don't tell me just platitudes like I believe.
Don't show me
you
that
know.
you showed up at the Raad Life and basically gave me an hour of your opinion.
Right. No. Don't show me that. Don't tell me on your flyer that you believe we should have great parks and support business and support public safety. Like you're supporting everything.
All the things that poll well.
All the platitudes.
But you don't even
And-
recycle.
And we have to resolve homelessness. But the question voters are asking, I believe, is so where were you when that issue was being discussed? Right? Were you active? Were you engaged in it? Or were you sitting back? And I think, and I'm hopeful again and optimistic that I think voters across the districts and in the mayor's race will be asking those hard questions.
Last thing I got to
you-
say.
you know-
I got to say this
Go ahead.
before Rod launches into another platitude here.
Not platitude. Go
The
ahead.
question everybody's going to ask is, where were they for this 2-hour conversation? Because this was amazing. This proves the power that people can really talk. Even when I tried to challenge you, even when I tried to give you some tough ones here, you didn't duck. You were there. And I thought it was an engaging, interesting way. We came up with some ideas here. If more people would talk, we could do better things together here.
Yes.
That's our theory.
In any election year, okay, but this is something since we are in election year of 2018. I will say this, okay. In my book, integrity is what you do when nobody's watching.
Yes, well,
Correct.
I agree.
Right? Not when the cameras are on, not when you're standing there basically and have a bully pulpit. Integrity is what you do when nobody's watching. In today's age, everything that you do is online forever. So whoever is looking to vote or cast their vote for anybody, whether it's at the county level, whether it's at the municipal level, and everything in between, the state level, congressional, it's very easy to do the research now. it's very easy to go and look, okay? And if somebody basically just became involved in stuff in the last 3 months, and
Watch
there's
out.
some photo ops, yes, you could vote for that person. But I would suggest you may look at the other person who's been doing this for a number of years, and there's integrity and authenticity in their effort and where their heart is and why they are being of service. Because that person will have my vote every single time.
Well, you got my vote, but I got to shut everybody off here because we've gone on for 2 hours.
Well,
here. Way
last
too
word,
long.
Dr. Moreno,
Last word.
you had something?
I agreed.
I agree. I like that.
I think that is a perfect place to end the show.
Let's all
Thank
agree.
you, my friend, for being here.
Thank you, Rod.
Appreciate it.
Same time next year.
You have been listening to the Raad Life radio show with your host and age explorer, Raad Gantos, brought to you on the one and only octalkradio.net. Join us again next week as we continue our journey of discovery into life's challenges, opportunities, options, and all the latest and greatest things that come with getting older.